12. So you can see my coordinates, and I'll let Ted introduce himself.
Thanks, Jeff. I'm Ted Theodoropoulos, founder and president of AcroWire. I think Jeff, being the humble guy that he is, didn't really emphasize the fact that he probably knows as much about SharePoint as anybody outside of Microsoft. So, and particularly about search, which drives Delve, and he's going to do the majority of the talking today. My background is in legal IT. We've been doing a lot of work in Office 365 and its predecessor, BPOS, for a number of years, and we've really been pleased to see how the platform has grown and matured, and we're thrilled to be having conversations about advanced capabilities like Delve today. So let me jump in here and also give you an overview of AcroWire, who we are and what we do. I see some familiar names in the participant list, so some of you already know us. We're legal focused, and we really, our area of expertise is at the intersection of legal and Microsoft technologies. We have three main areas of practice. We have an intranet and extranet team, and all of that is built around SharePoint. So we do farm planning and design. We help customers move from on-prem versions of SharePoint to other on-prem versions of SharePoint or into the cloud. We're doing a lot of branding and search work these days, and do some custom development, custom web parts, and a lot of work these days with what's now called the SharePoint add-in model. We have a custom app dev practice, and that's all based on Microsoft as well. I'm also a former Microsoft employee. I was on the SQL team back in many years ago, back in the late 90s, early 2000s, and we have a BI team that leverages that SQL infrastructure quite a bit, and on the front end, we're doing a lot with SharePoint and with both Excel services and Performance Point, as well as Power BI, if you happen to be in the cloud, which I know a lot of law firms are starting to toy around with that, but may not necessarily be there yet. I mentioned that we're legal focused. This is really kind of what that looks like. We're very involved with ILTA. I do, a dozen or more road shows every year all over the country. A number of these webinars. We just had one yesterday, in fact, and had another one in October. I speak at SharePoint Symposium, ILTACon, and then we're also involved with our groups, BI and KM conferences. We see you people at all the events that ILTA sponsors, and as well as Legal Tech, and if you're involved in LMA or LALL, we'll catch you at those as well. So I'm going to turn this over to Jeff to introduce BA Insight.
Yeah, and graphics notwithstanding on this slide, BA Insight is a Microsoft partner, a gold partner that builds add-on products for SharePoint, focused on search and portals and intranets, which are driven by search, and include connectivity to lots of systems such as iManage or eDocs or Elite, as well as UI components and things that make metadata. We've worked a lot with the leading law firms, as well as in other domains such as pharmaceutical or financial services, and we're a partner with AcroWire, where essentially we provide add-on products and AcroWire provides services in order to help law firms with their SharePoint portals. So now you have a sense of where we're coming from. We're really going to be talking in 4 sections for the rest of the hour. I'll give you a sense of what is this thing called Delve? And that's all color-coded yellow here. Go a little bit under the hood. How is it built? How do you use it? Some tips and tricks. And then talk about how to adopt it and sort of what's a journey for putting it to use. Because any new tool like this is, it's what are good practices are always evolving. And then a little bit about where this is going, because this is a very active area specifically for Microsoft. And that's the outline. Before we get into it much further, we have a quick poll so we have a sense of how familiar people in the audience are with Delve. And Christy, maybe you could pull that up. So we see that most of you have either never heard of Delve before or don't know much about it, and you're in the perfect place. One of the reasons I love the ILTA seminars is that they really do a great job in education. And this helps us with respect to how deep we go. And I think I can promise you that you'll walk away with much more understanding both of the what and why you should care. Let's give this another minute. And then, Ted, maybe you can open it up and talk about the motivation behind Delve.
Absolutely. So, as I mentioned, we do a tremendous amount of work in legal, and we see firsthand the sea of information that law firms swim in. And much of that content is unstructured. So documents are a good example. The work product that law firms put out typically takes the form of documents. And but however, there are multiple information silos within a legal context: DMS, CRM, time and billing, your financial systems. And today we're going to talk about Delve, which is driven by what's called the Office Graph. And the combination of these platforms provides a mechanism through which relevant information can ultimately find you, which is a good thing. Search is a great capability. Enterprise search is a great capability that law firms should seriously consider in their overall information governance strategy. And we think that Delve is going to play a role in that broader strategy, because ultimately it creates opportunities to collaborate both within and across practice areas. And in the legal world, we know that sometimes there are divisions within or across practice areas where you may have collaborators on a particular initiative or matter where there are interactions that define relationships that the Office Graph, Jeff's going to talk about how the Office Graph captures those and how Delve ultimately surfaces information that's relevant based on those interactions. So I think we all realize that the amount of content that we interact with is not likely to decrease. In fact, the opposite is taking place. So as information becomes more accessible, so does this, the concept of information overload that we all ultimately experience, not just within legal, but across industries. And the reality is that this trajectory of information overload is going to continue, and that information growth curve isn't linear. it's really exponential. And this is why you see so much chatter out there these days about big data. And what we need to do is design strategies to contend with this increasing amount of content. It's not an option, but even if it were, the answer is not less content, it's better filters. And I'm going to turn it over to Jeff here to talk about how Delve helps filter information and ultimately bring it to you.
Thanks, Ted. So as you can see, the goal of Delve is to be that intelligent filter, both with what's often called active discovery. I mean, the top 7 sites on the intranet are all people finding things, typically through search, and passive discovery, where new information is brought to you that you really should know about. And Delve works across all of Office 365, and as we get into it, there's really 2 parts of it. There's the face, which is called Delve, and you can see a sense of what it looks like in these screenshots, but I'll give you a deeper tour. And then there is the intelligence behind it, which is called the Office Graph. And the Office Graph is essentially a people-centric organization of everything in Office 365. So it connects to people, and then files, tasks, emails, etc., and looks at the connections between them. Sometimes these are very explicit, like Ted is the author of this file, but also things which are not explicit but are discovered through machine learning. And the top 2 of these are working with, who's working with whom, and trending around. What's the information or files or data that is, hot near me? And those are both a form of this sort of passive discovery, looking at interactions. So the Office Graph is taking content from everything in Office 365. SharePoint and files in SharePoint, but also your email from Exchange and the files and group membership you have if you use Yammer, and your activity in Lync. So for example, by presenting this PowerPoint through Lync, the Office Graph would recognize that the participants here have seen this file and registered that as a connection both between the presentation and all the people, but also as a connection between the people. And this uses a pretty sophisticated machine learning facility under the hood. Let me give you a sense really of what it looks like. What I did for this webinar was go up this morning and make some recordings just from my desktop, because it makes it works well on sort of this format. So you should be able to see, if I go into our intranet, Delve is right on what's called the waffle there. And when I pull it up, it's a card-like format. It looks somewhat like Pinterest, if you're familiar with that, in which I can see all of the documents trending around me, and I can see the people I'm working with. When I go to Eric, who's a colleague, I can see what's trending around him, pull up those documents, and then follow links to other people. Or if I go to Tony, I can see what's trending around him, really personalized to the relationship between us. Similarly, if I go look at myself, there's an ability to do profiling and activity from there. And built into Delve is the search capability. So if I look for Office Graph, I see first the elements that I've authored, since I'm looking at me in Office Graph. And things are presented really in order of activity, both what I've offered and how many people have looked at it. So you can probably see on the upper left this, we had an announcement today actually of support of a new thing called the Microsoft Graph, which is, we'll be talking about in a second, and it has 11 views, so that's why that's first. So it gives you a flavor of what Delve looks like. It's a very, very nice looking and tends to be really popular with users because it's very intuitive. But it's a different paradigm than most people have used before. And therefore, we'll get into how do you think about it so that you can get your mind around how to use it. Now, we've talked about the two pieces, the Office Graph and Delve, but what you will, if you're a Microsoft watcher, you'll hear a lot of messages around that. I think Ted is a pretty active, very close with Microsoft, so maybe you can interpret them for us, the difference between the sort of the marketing and reality, if you will.
So,
all right, go ahead.
Jeff?
We may have a little bit of a audio, so I'll just run through this. The Microsoft has been, Delve first was announced, which was in May 2004, and then became available in all tenants and really rolled out in January of this year. There's a theme called Work Like a Network, so that it's really about being collaborative. And the idea that everything in the world is connected, but we haven't really changed the way that organizations work internally. And that is the motivation behind having a quite new both tool and paradigm in the form of the Office Graph. So you'll see more and more of this kind of stuff from Microsoft. They have a whole hashtag of Work Like a Network built around the Office Graph and the use of Office 365 more generally. So we've gotten a sense of what is Delve, this awareness and discovery tool, and why you should care, which is about the information overload sort of tsunami we all experience almost every day. Let me go a little bit deeper to give you a sense of where Delve came from, what's under the hood. As a former academic, I still keep very up with the computer science research. This topic of graph search, graph in the context of things being connected to each other, not XY integration, really I date as a decade old, which is fairly young. The first academic publications in graph search were 10 years ago. But some major corporations have been building on this. Wolfram Alpha, if you're not familiar with it, is a great site for mathematically oriented stuff. So if you want to know how many people in France are almost anything, demographics, world knowledge. That came out about 5 years ago. Google followed suit, and Google has a knowledge graph, and you can see their sort of mantra. Facebook added graph search and a standard called Open Graph, which is also used by Yammer in 2013, and then the Office Graph was introduced in March 2014 with, as I mentioned, first release this year and full rollout by March, and then effectively monthly updates. So there's a quick progression of the use of this graph search. And often I say, if you want to get a sense of why you'd care about using graph search, to bring it back to sort of a consumer environment, you can just look at Facebook, because Facebook is very popular, and I'm going to just go over to my Facebook, if you'll excuse the informality of it, and give you a sense. That's what I look like when I'm not at work. Within Facebook, there is also a nature of connectedness. So I can look at my friends, and we all know that we're 4 degrees removed from Kevin Bacon, but I'm going to look at my friends who like Microsoft SharePoint. It turns out that I have a lot of friends that are in this SharePoint arena. But let's say I want to look at find someone that can help me understand how Google looks at this, because there's sort of different worlds. And I can say, I also have a lot of friends at Google. Do I have any friends who work at Google and like SharePoint? And lo and behold, it turns out I don't have any. There's nobody, perhaps because they're sort of arch enemies. But if I look for friends of friends, and I go out, if you will, one more degree in the graph, I'm looking at relationships, I can find from that a couple of people that are interesting, and figure out how I can get to them and look at their perspective on things. So this idea of relationships and graph search, that gives you a pretty concrete idea of it. And you can imagine working for a client and trying to see if there's anybody in your firm who's dealt with this topic or this client or has this experience. That sort of expertise finding is one of the areas where we are using the Office Graph. And the thing to remember is that it's really oriented around, more than anything else, people and the connections between people and groups. Now, under the hood, the Office Graph is built off of SharePoint 2013 search. It's the same technology, but there's a graph structure that's plugged in as an add-in to the search index. It's the same basic API for queries and results, questions and answers. And the analytics, this machine learning, started from a search analytics database that's in SharePoint 2013 designed for recommendations, and has grown into a very sophisticated and smart thing from there.
Jeff, so we know Office Graph is in the cloud. Can you tell us about what's the on-prem story for Office Graph?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Ted, and one that's particularly pertinent for law firms because most law firms are either not in Office 365 or just starting. The Office Graph and Delve are cloud only. They won't be brought on-prem by Microsoft. And you can access them a bit through hybrid SharePoint. And it's essentially the same way you would use OneDrive or Yammer by linking into them from SharePoint. And if anyone's interested in that, we did a webinar together, Ted and I, about SharePoint 2016 yesterday that shows a little bit of that. But this is a cloud-only thing. Now, the Delve and the Office Graph go together, but they are really two different things at some level. You can, for example, make something that looks like Delve and that has that exploratory look and feel, but is running on-prem in SharePoint. And my friend Mikkel Svensson has a great blog of how to do that. I was working with a customer last week who wanted to spin that out. It's not that difficult. Or you can make it look different, or you can build applications on top of it. And I'll give you a couple of examples there so that you understand that, if you will, the distinction between the Office Graph, which is the intelligence, and Delve, which is the UI. I have a little site that I use. I have a lot of sites in my SharePoint, but this is one that I use specifically around the graphs. And there's a number of apps. There's a company called Navention that's created some simple apps off of the Office Graph, which are static pages that are pre-configured. So this one is, what are the most popular documents according to the Office Graph? And it gives me a sense of who's been reading what's happening within my tenant. There's another one that I use all the time, which is show me what is trending in sites I follow. So there's a project site that I'm following in SharePoint, and the Office Graph tells me which things have the most activity, which things are trending. If you remember, there's a trending around me is sort of this machine learning score. And these are in the Office Store. You can just pull them down. And then this is something that I built, which is just a fun thing. My kids love playing with it. This is an alternative to Delve. It just happens to use a different presentation. It's a bootstrap framework called Bubbles. So the popularity of a document is the size of the circle, etc. And this is exactly the same thing you get from Delve, just a different look and feel. So the Office Graph and Delve go together out of the box in Office 365. If you have Office 365, you have Delve. And you also have the Office Graph. If you want an on-prem presentation and you like this idea, drop me a line, because it's possible to have that look and feel, but not the same level of intelligence as the Office Graph. And if you want to use one of these Navention apps, they're in the Office Store. Download them for free. Or if you like any of the presentations or things like that, I've got material about how you build those. So you got a sense about the Office Graph and Delve. Because the Office Graph is very big brotherish, it's sort of watching all your activity. One of the most big, top questions I get is about security. Okay, well, can people see what I'm doing? Can people see documents and activity that they're not supposed to? And there's been a lot of attention to that in Delve. So it's, I'll say that technically this is very secure and also auditable in terms of these signals, which you can think of as activities. If I share something with someone, that's a signal. If I send someone an email, that's a signal. There is a phenomena, though, that I call security through obscurity. It's pretty common that perhaps you have a file that people are allowed to read that maybe they shouldn't be allowed to read, and Delve will make it more likely that they'll run into it. So that's something to watch out for. Security is quite strong. The other thing that's had a lot of attention is device views. So, for example, the Android version of Delve came out in May. I was actually one of the first people running it, and it's now on every device, etc. Another aspect of Delve that's important are profiles. I didn't show this, but in Delve, it sees my profile, it sees what I'm working on, and sort of this organizational hierarchy is one of the factors in who I'm working with. So that's now part of Delve as Delve profiles. That's across Office 365.
Yeah. Could you maybe touch on the future of MySite and how Delve profiles fit into that picture?
Yeah, this is actually one of Ted's fond of pointing out that Delve profiles they look a lot like MySite, and Microsoft does have this tendency to have multiple things that do the same thing. Delve profiles are sort of the next generation of MySites. If you're using them, you don't need MySites, and ultimately, over time, Microsoft's intent is to have people using this instead of MySites. And similarly, there's a facility that was added about a month ago. And there's things coming out all the time, new signals, a thing called praise where I can say, Ted is good. There's also stories, and if you came to the Office Mix or Sway webinar in this series, they're both accessible through Delve, and Office Mix in particular is used as part of the storytelling. And this is like, creating a blog is really simple and a modern experience. So it's like the next version of wikis, rather than using SharePoint wikis. There's also a facility called boards. So you can tag things and say, this is all should be on this board, and then anyone using that board will be aware of it. Very much like Pinterest activity if you've used Pinterest. And that is a great way to provide sort of collaboration and teamwork on a really simple basis. You simply add a tag to a board. Through accessibility, this is one of the new things in the last month. There's keyboard shortcuts, that things are integrated with Cortana if you happen to be running Windows 10, so that you can navigate and be notified by Delve with these shortcuts. And that gives you a flavor of sort of the user interface. The other area that's growing quite fast are the kinds of content. You'll see here people, documents, video, social gestures are things like participation in a group. And that is what's called content. And then all of these things are signals. Had I searched? Did I present something? Did I save or elevate a particular document or group? And these, this is a full set now, but they're adding about 2 signals and 1 additional content type per month.
So Jeff talked a lot about, what Delve is and showed you some demonstrations of the product and underneath it, the engine that ultimately drives the experience. And there are really kind of three categories that we wanted to highlight that you really need to kind of wrap your head around to fully understand Delve. The first is related to personalization. So every Delve user will have a different feed. Just like Facebook, no two users' news feeds or wall will be the same. And the reason that is because the graph records who they interact with and what they have permission to. So the experience is going to be highly personalized. The information that Graph assembles comes from all of those back-end services that Office 365 enables, such as email, Skype, Yammer, etc. And Graph ultimately connects those dots. The next category is productivity, and Delve content really hones down and is limited to that which is relevant. So users will be presented with content that they normally might not have awareness of, and that's one of the big benefits of Delve is the fact that you are getting pushed content instead of pulling, and things can show up in your Delve feed that you wouldn't even know to search for. A good example that, one of the ways we use Delve here internally is we store all of our proposals and statements of work in SharePoint, and I can log into my Delve feed and see what's upcoming. So I don't even have to log into CRM to get a feel for which engagements are moving forward, because Delve shows me the proposals that are actively being worked on and statements of work that are ultimately being derived from those activities. The third is collaboration. So being able to see what content other users in the organization are interacting with is going to drastically increase the number of opportunities to collaborate. And those are benefits that, especially in a law firm scenario where so many walls are in place around areas of practice, Delve can help break down those walls, which is a good thing. So we've talked a lot about defining what Delve and the Office Graph are, and the next thing we'd like to discuss with you is how you can use Delve today. So what I'd like to start with is, Christy, if we could get the second poll in place there, I'd like to get a feel for where folks are today with respect to Office 365 in the cloud. So if you wouldn't mind answering this question in the poll, this will kind of help us do a temperature check on where folks are today. And I mentioned this on the webinar yesterday, and I'll say it again here because I think it's very relevant. When we were at ILTACON 2013, which is a little 2.5 years ago, the Office 365 conversations were pretty much non-existent. Obviously, folks had heard of it, but nobody was there for the most part in terms of deployment, and very few people were really open to that scenario. As you can see here, things have changed dramatically. We've got 24% that are already there for certain things, and you've got another 6% that are planning to move to Office 365. So that's a third. That ratio is, like I said, has drastically changed over the last 3 years, and we've seen it accelerate. So we're migrating AmLaw 50 law firm right now to Office 365, and there are several other AmLaw 100 and 200 firms that are well on their way. So this is a good thing.
Yeah, so I think the number one thing in terms of using it is if you're using Office 365 now, you can use this immediately. If you're not, then you're either just think about it as awareness and planning for the future, or you're in an area of some techniques and what I'd call tricks that we have customers doing to leverage the graph even from if almost everything's on-prem.
Point. So as Jeff alluded to, the step one is to get access to an Office 365 tenant. You know, many firms have licensing incorporated into their enterprise agreement today. So, you know, if you've got more than 250 workstations, endpoints in your environment, you probably have an EA, enterprise agreement, and there's a good chance that access to Office 365 is already there. Even if your organization isn't there yet, if I were a SharePoint person or just somebody who had an interest in where things were going, I'd go buy a personal subscription, an E1. It's $8 a month. The experience that you get in Delve is obviously going to be limited because the Office graph is not going to have the information from Exchange and Skype for Business and SharePoint, and that ultimately drives Delve. But you can already start to play with the product and you know, ultimately figure out if there's a business case for bringing it to your firm. So how to start? You know, obviously the answer depends. It depends on, you know, what the stance of cloud and Office 365 is, and it varies. We still have firms that say, absolutely no way, we're not going there. We've seen that stance soften quite a bit. Not too many. We're not hearing that too much anymore. It's more a conversation of when, not if. You know, but the concept of crawl, walk, run is one that I think bodes well here. So, you know, use Delve yourself and understand the capabilities. And, you know, this is a very much a work in progress. Delve is polished. So when I say work in progress, I don't mean that you're going to go into the UI and it's going to look clunky. It's not your typical 1.0 UI that you see sometimes out of Microsoft. But it's evolving in the back end, and the amount of content that it's bringing in and the number of signals that it's tracking. And then secondly, you know, after you've crawled, then we would suggest that you walk and evaluate how your team collaborates today and figure out where the gaps are and how Delve can ultimately bridge those gaps. And then when you're ready to run, you know, I'm not just saying this because I'm a partner, but it's prudent advice. You know, find somebody either externally, or if you happen to have hired, you're new to Office 365 and you've hired from, you know, another firm, you've got resources that have experience with it, leverage that resource because it's a whole new world out there. And Microsoft is constantly evolving the APIs around Office Graph and, you know, figure out what integration opportunities may exist. So, you know, the message here is that slow and steady wins the race. Delve and the Office Graph are new, and social concepts take time to gain momentum in law firms. So, again, the message is define specific use cases where Delve can add value in the firm, and then make a business case for that. And we don't think that's going to be too hard to do. One of the resources that I'd like to point you towards, if Office 365 is in your future, and based on that poll, it looks like that's the case for many of you. something called Microsoft Fast Track for Office 365. The URL is at the top of the slide. There are several tools and resources to help you design and execute a strategy to move to Office 365. And the resources there can help with envisioning, onboarding, adoption, and management of your Office 365 tenant. So that's a great place to start. And I'll let Jeff talk about the new Graph API. You on mute, Jeff?
How did you guess I was on mute? Ted mentioned the crawl, walk, run, which I heartily subscribe to. In what I'd say the run category are a set of APIs to work with the Office Graph across everything in Office 365. And these were actually announced and released from Microsoft just before Thanksgiving. So this is new stuff. And I mentioned as a vendor, we've been participating in this and use it, including a way to bring things in to the Office Graph, because the Office Graph is aimed at everything being in Office 365, but we know that no firm has all of their content in Office 365. There's DM systems like iManage or WorldDocs, LegalWorks, or eDocs, and we've already had a couple of questions in the forum about those specifically. So it is possible to bring content from outside Office 365 into Delve, and this is pretty new. BA Insight as a vendor makes connectors to over 50 systems that have been working with on-prem systems for years. And we've added that capability first to Office 365. Actually won an award for that in September. And now into the Office Graph. So if you want to take content and have it show up, that works quite well. If you're looking for signals from your DM system, the hooks aren't there. There's some limited things we can do, but it's not quite as rich in terms of feeding the machine learning as things that are in Office 365. So it's possible to get external content, and if you want to know more, always happy to talk about that. So we've talked about what is Delve, how you can adopt it, what you put in your planning. And I will finish up by saying this is a very active area for Microsoft. If you look in the roadmap.office.com, you'll see items from around Delve and the Office Graph right up there along with any other element of Office 365. Actually, probably in the late summer, almost half the items that were sort of exciting new things had to do with the Office Graph and Delve. And new signals are getting added all the time. I mean, one of the questions about signals for phone calls and link messaging, the link sharing, like presentations, etc., is there now. Link IMs count now as participation, but the content of those IMs is not yet in place. And phone calls, actual link phone calls of who you called, especially people outside the organizations, are not yet in the Office Graph. But those are all ultimately grist for the mill. And this is a also a big initiative in terms of what's called organizational analytics. There's a thing called Delve Organizational Analytics that hit first release last week that lets you basically take all of this behavior and then look at it. You can see, for example, who's working with whom. There's a report about what percentage of your meetings, phone calls, emails are outside of work hours, called a work-life balance report. Although we think most of us in this industry already know that that balance is a little out of whack. This essentially really makes that visible. And then in September, Microsoft announced they were acquiring a company called Volumetrics that does this sort of organizational analytics specifically to hook it to the Office Graph. So you can look at that as a watch this space. I expect it to show up in the next few weeks so that you start getting reports. And there's a whole wave here. These sort of graph-driven experiences and machine learning is a big wave as part of data analytics. And as I showed you, all the big guys from IBM Watson, Google, Facebook, and of course Microsoft are all over this. So it's a very big wave from a technology standpoint. So that gives you a little glimpse of where it's going. I think what we've covered today hopefully gives you a sense of what is Delve, why you should care. There's some links to help you get started, both in exploring, understand how to work with it. There's a Yammer group and a blog around it. And then, of course, if you want to get going today in planning or just have more questions, you can see their contact information there.
And yeah, so we have one question here that Ellen would like to know how and if Delve would work with Interaction CRM. Jeff, BA Insight have a connector for Interaction?
We do. We actually have a connector already shipping for Interaction, and the way, at least currently, that that works is that content that's in Interaction, meaning contacts and opportunities, current activity, email that you're tracking, etc., all will show up in the Office Graph. And if you want to come into Delve and use that experience within Interaction, you do that essentially through an iframe. You embed it so you can get awareness of that. So what's there now is that level of integration, what you're doing and what other people are doing in Interaction, you can see through the graph. As I mentioned before, there isn't a full integration of signals, and a key area that's open is CRM systems are often managing things with your clients, and they are not yet objects in this Office Graph, but that's something that we're working on actively at BA Insight as a potential add-on.
So,
I think,
sorry, I was just going to, before we're coming up on the top of the hour, did anybody have any other quick questions that we wanted to cover? So before I turn it over to Christy, I wanted to thank everyone today for attending. Both Jeff and my contact information that you're on the slide. Please reach out with any questions you might have about Delve, and please also keep AcroWire and BA Insight in mind for any SharePoint or Office 365 initiatives that you have coming down the pike. And with that, I'll turn it over to Chris.
Well, Jeff and Ted, thanks so much for the information on a timely topic for our Ultima membership. I want to give this opportunity to the audience to ask any other questions that you have. You can enter them in the Q&A box. You can dial *6 if you just want to ask a quick verbal question. So while we wait for that, if there's any of those last ones coming in, I want to mention that there's a copy of the PowerPoint and a link to the recording on our website in a few days. And then here shortly you'll be receiving a request for you to evaluate the webinar. Please just take a few minutes to provide us your feedback. So they're super important to us when we are looking at programming for future opportunities. I want to say thanks again to the Insight and AcroWire for sponsoring today's webinar, and thanks to our speakers and to all of you for attending. I do see we have one question in here about how is personal content handled?
Good. I'm not on mute. The way that Delve handles personal content, by which I presume you mean my stuff as opposed to group stuff, is through OneDrive. If you have things on your OneDrive for Business and you have it shared, then that will show up to the Office Graph. Otherwise, your personal content is confidential to you and not factored in. And by the way, there have been a number of questions through the session that we tried to answer along with where they showed up in the material. If, for example, the integration with Worldox question, I hope I covered with, along with iManage and interactions as being in the class of systems we already integrate in. If for any reason you feel like that wasn't fully answered, just drop it back into the Q&A and we can elaborate.
Well, guys, I don't see any other questions coming in, so I think we can wrap it up. Thank you again to both of you, and to everyone, please keep an eye on Ultima's website under meetings for upcoming webinars and meetings. We look forward to seeing you on future webinars. Have a great afternoon and happy holidays.